Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the Spoken Greats podcast. Testing out a new microphone today, so please let me know if it sounds any better or if it sounds any worse. The production budget of this podcast has near enough quadrupled, as I've just got a Shure SM7B microphone, one of the microphones commonly used by a lot of the top podcasts. So I hope it sounds better. Otherwise, I can always go back to using my old microphone. Today, I'm drinking a Morrison's instant coffee because I am just running a quick little episode to test this microphone, and next week I'll get some wine out again. So please let me know what you're drinking in the comments. Today I want to talk about The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. Taleb was a day trader for best part of 20 years before going on to write a lot of different books on economics and risk. And I just finished reading this book a couple of weeks ago and I absolutely fell in love with Taleb's writing. He's clearly a very entertaining read. It's quite humorous, and he just picks apart a lot of the conventional ways of thinking, particularly the pointlessness of forecasting and the tendency to bring maths into forecasting to give the illusion of certainty when actually most forecasts are no better than someone guessing. So what is a black swan? A black swan is an event which is unpredictable and has disproportionate effects on society or in history. This could be something such as a terrorist attack, a war, a pandemic, and these things are often non-linear. And Taleb notices a tendency for humans to backcast and look into history and take the wrong conclusions. So they'll look at a black swan event and then they will say, well, it was obvious that was going to happen. So look at the example of World War One. Everyone talks about World War One as if it was an inevitable thing that was going to happen. And, all the signs were there. Well, not necessarily. Germany was the largest trading partner of the UK before the First World War broke out. Also, if you look at bond prices at the time, so what investors felt was going to happen, they certainly weren't investing their money as if they believed a war was going to break out suddenly. And that can often tell you more about what someone actually believes is where they're putting their money versus making a prediction at a think tank conference where you have no skin in the game, to use a Taleb expression, tells you less about someone versus if they had to bet their own money on something happening. So one of the first lessons that Taleb teaches in the book is the problem with relying on data for looking into the future. And he gives the example of a turkey and plotting out the life of a turkey on a graph. You'll see that it's a nice straight linear line going from bottom left to top right. Over the course of 1,000 days, this turkey's lifespan has been pretty constant. And so if you were looking at the trend line, you would expect that to continue. Except the issue here is that day 1001, the turkey is slaughtered for Thanksgiving lunch. And so the lifespan on day 1000 is a nice straight linear line diagonally up. And then on day 1001, the line just plummets to zero. So the key takeaway here is that the problem with data is that it's in the past. And the future is not obliged to follow what the past has already done. If you were a turkey and you were looking at the data and you saw, well, all of my life, these humans have provided this food to me. I've had a long, happy life. They've always treated me quite well. I have no reason to believe that this won't continue. And that would be a perfectly rational conclusion based on the data that you have available to you. But black swans don't conform to data. They are non-linear. So Taleb explains this as if you imagine there are two countries, as Mediocristan and Extremistan. In Mediocristan, everything is linear, proportionate and is quantifiable. You can use mathematics to predict, and everything conforms to the law of average. So it gives the example of if you had a stadium full of people with all the variations in human height, the tallest person there would still not account for a disproportionate amount of the height amongst all the other people there. Even if they're several deviations above the average, they will not make that much difference to the overall combined height of everyone. However, if you take that same stadium and were to divide people according to wealth, you would find that few individuals who were a few deviations above the average would control a disproportionate amount of the wealth. Height belongs to Mediocristan. Money belongs to Extremistan. You can have extreme results from money, and it can't be predicted in a linear fashion. Similarly with weight, you could try and eat as many calories as you could in one day. Let's say you tried, maybe you managed to eat 4,000 calories in one day. As a proportion of your total calorie intake for 1 year, it's not going to make that much difference. Whereas with money, you could lose all of your money in one day or gain most of a fortune in one day compared to the earnings or losses for the rest of the year. So money is a non-linear domain and belongs to Extremistan, whereas height and weight belong to Mediocristan. So it takes this further with professions. So certain professions belong to Mediocristan because they're quite stable, steadily predictable. So like a doctor or a dentist has pretty stable work. Earnings are basically tied to the number of hours they work or the number of clients that they see. So that is a perfectly linear, proportionate relationship to their work. Whereas someone who is perhaps creative, as a musician or in entertainment or whatever, they will not have proportionate results. So they could earn nothing, they could earn absolutely nothing, or they could have extreme results, and they will find that they will have disproportionate success, more than the doctors and dentists. And so in Extremistan, you can have a winner-takes-all situation. This is where the 80-20 principle comes in. If you've not heard of this before, this is sometimes known as the Pareto distribution. This is where an Italian economist first noticed that about 20% of the people in Italy held about 80% of the wealth. And then he went on to look at other domains and realized that this was the case in a lot of things. And actually the 80-20 principle is actually kind of a watered down version of this law because there is no limit to it. And sometimes it can be as extreme as 150, 1% has 50% or even more. So in Extremistan, you have these extreme variations in outcome. A domain can also move from Mediocristan to Extremistan. Taleb gives the example of opera singers. Before the invention of the gramophone, there were a lot more opera singers. It was very common for even small towns to have an opera house, and there would be plenty of stable work. Because if you were an excellent opera singer, your work capped out naturally at the number of shows that you could perform at. Maybe you got to perform at the best theatres. Well, if you were an opera singer in a smaller town, your work wasn't really threatened by the best opera singers because they were unlikely to come and perform at your town. It's not worth their time or money. And so the earnings of the opera singers would kind of be maxed out there. You can't just perform an infinite number of shows. However, when the gramophone was invented, suddenly it was possible for everyone to listen to the best singers. And so it became a winner takes all. Like, why would you pay to go see your local singer when you can hear the best singer at home whenever you want to? And so in creative domains, it's very difficult to predict what will be a success and what will be a failure. This can be an example of book publishers. Minority of books account for all of the profits of a publishing house, and they will pay for the other couple hundred of books that they've published that year, which didn't make any sales. And people always post-rationalize success and kind of construct a narrative around things like, oh, they were always destined to be a success. But if that was the case, then why would publishers waste their time with the other hundreds of books that they publish? If they knew in advance that those books were going to be a failure, then they wouldn't have published them. Clearly, they saw some potential in the books and thought that they would be a success. But the truth is that we can't predict these outcomes. Creativity falls into this domain of unknown unknowns, and technology as well. If you think about some of the most important inventions recently, it's like the computer and the internet. These things weren't discovered deliberately. Were fallen on by chance, and most scientific discoveries are found in this way. Often scientists set out to do one thing and they found something unexpected, and that unexpected thing then led them to the discovery of a new technology. This is quite problematic in the research domain because grants are given out on the basis of institutions wanting a return on investment for the grants that they're giving out. A lot of researchers are forced towards linear, predictable domains where they try and make a marginal increase in an improvement to something. To truly make a discovery, you just have to try a lot of things, and 99% of them will be shit, but that 1% will pay for the other 99%. The funny thing about penicillin, when Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, he was kind of dicking about in a hospital with some petri dishes of bacteria when he should have cleaned up this lab. If he was following all the right procedures, then penicillin never would have been discovered. And so you can't factor that in, because for every Alexander Fleming there's thousands of incompetent, unhygienic scientists who maybe should have cleaned their lab properly, and when they didn't, it didn't produce penicillin. And that's the other silent evidence that you have to try a lot of different things in order to produce extreme outcomes, because if it was already predictable, then it would already exist. When people make forecasts, they can often fail to take into consideration the impact of new technologies. If you think, new technologies are constantly emerging, and when those new technologies emerge, that leads us down a whole new path, and that was path dependent on that technology being discovered. And so if we could predict that new technology existing, then we likely already would have that technology. So this is why it's unpredictable. Now, I'm going to read to you a quote from a memo from the Pentagon. This was sent in 2001, before 9/11, I should say, a few months before 9/11, when the US Department of Defense was conducting a defense review. So they were looking at what threats would the United States potentially face in the future, and so how should they spend the budget preparing the military accordingly for that. And so here's what it says. If you had been a security policymaker in the world's greatest power in 1900, you would have been a Brit, looking warily at your age-old enemy, France. By 1910, you would be allied with France, and your enemy would be Germany. By 1920, World War I would have been fought and won, and you'd be engaged in a naval arms race with your erstwhile allies, the US and Japan. By 1930, naval arms limitations treaties were in effect. The Great Depression was underway, and defense planning standards said no war for 10 years. 9 years later, World War II had begun. By 1950, Britain was no longer the world's greatest power. The atomic age had dawned, and a police action was underway in Korea. 10 years later, the political focus was on the missile gap. The strategic paradigm was shifting from massive retaliation to flexible response, and few people had heard of Vietnam. By 1970, the peak of our involvement in Vietnam had come and gone. We were beginning détente with the Soviets, and we were anointing the Shah as our protégé in the Gulf region. By 1980, the Soviets were in Afghanistan, Iran was in the throes times of revolution, there was talk of our hollow forces and the window of vulnerability, and the US was the greatest creditor nation the world had ever seen. By 1990, the Soviet Union was in a year of dissolution. American forces in the desert were on the verge of showing they were anything but hollow. The US had become the greatest debtor nation the world had ever known, and almost no one had heard of the internet. 10 years later, Warsaw was the capital of a NATO nation, asymmetric threats transcended geography, and the parallel revolutions of information, biotechnology, robotics, nanotechnology, and high-density energy sources foreshadowed changes almost beyond forecasting. All of which is to say that I'm not sure what 2010 will look like, but I'm sure that it'll be very little like we expect, so we should plan accordingly. So that was written, rather ironically, a few months before the September 11 attacks. And so if you were to fast forward to 2010, by this point, the United States was fighting two counterinsurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan, respectively, and had declared a global war on terrorism. If you were to project from the 2010s to the 2020s, you would assume that the trend of multilateral collaboration would intensify and that state competition was a thing of the past. Maybe we'd see more supranational organizations like the European Union becoming more important. Fast forward 10 years and the UK has left the European Union. Russia is now 2 years into a full-scale war with Ukraine. There was an assumption that as China embraced market capitalism, it would adopt more Western values. Instead, it's become increasingly authoritarian. It's effectively removed the one country, two systems of government in Hong Kong. And there's an increasingly tense relationship between China and the United States. So the only real takeaway you can take away from this is that we don't know and we can't predict. And all these forecasters who say things with such conviction that it's going to be like this, it makes for a great soundbite in the news, but they're almost always wrong. And there's no repercussions for that. People just say any old shit and no one will look back and go, hang on a minute, 15 years ago you said this and that didn't happen. And then they'll make up some excuse for not being right. Anything other than simply them saying that they don't know. So this is the drawback to forecasting. Now that we've established that forecasting is pretty much useless for things which are in the possession of Extremistan, and I would include foreign affairs and most events in Extremistan. Something like a conflict is non-linear and violence can escalate exponentially. So it's not proportionate, which makes it a black swan in it can increase dramatically. Versus, for example, if someone has cancer, the probability of me getting cancer does not increase by them having cancer. Similarly, if my neighbour dies in a car accident, I am not then more likely to die in a car accident. If you were looking at the averages and the probability, you would say I was, but it doesn't directly affect me, whereas violence can increase exponentially. Pandemics as well. So if my neighbour dies of COVID-19, my chances of dying of COVID-19 will obviously increase because it's contagious. So how does Taleb recommend dealing with risk? Dealing with black swans, negative black swans, and also taking advantage of positive black swans. So there was a speech by Donald Rumsfeld, former US Secretary of Defense, who was ridiculed in the media for talking about there being known knowns. So these are facts that we know, and talking about there being known unknowns. So things that we would like to find out, but we're aware that we do not know. And then he talked about unknown unknowns. So these are things that we do not even know exist. We do not know that we do not know them. But Rumsfeld was actually right. The unknown unknown effectively is the black swan. This is something that military leaders have generally understood for quite a long time, and they've had to justify to finance departments why they retain certain capabilities. And it all comes down to options. When you can't predict what war you will be fighting next, the next best thing you can do is give yourself lots of options so that you're ready for whatever conflict may emerge in the future. And trying to hedge your bets and thinking, okay, well, we're probably not going to need an aircraft carrier because we're only going to be fighting terrorism for the next 10 years. And we can get rid of all the Arabic translators because we're closing down the Middle East, so there's no need to be doing anything there. And then obviously something comes out which totally upends that projection. And so keeping your options open is a very sound strategy. Now, in risk management, Taleb recommends the barbell strategy for investing. So this is where you invest 90% of your money in something which basically has no risk. The payoff could be low, it could be quite marginal, but your exposure to risk is as low as possible. And then the other 10% goes into high risk, high reward activities. So you're only making small bets. There's a small loss if you're wrong, but a very high payoff if you're right. So if you imagine a barbell, you've got the weights at both ends and then you've just got the bar in the middle. Taleb advocates basically removing medium risk, because medium risk, medium reward is not worth it, because you've got a reasonably high probability of loss for not that great a gain. And so it basically cuts out most of like the stock market, for example, and advocates, what was it? I think it was, so like 90% of his portfolio is either US Treasury bonds, which are like the closest thing you can get to a zero risk. I think if the United States folds on Treasury bonds, and there's bigger problems going on, you're talking guns and water at that point. And the other 10% it puts into ventures, which may pay off, they may not, be quite risky. Investing in businesses, maybe. And the whole point of this strategy is minimizing your exposure to negative consequences and maximizing your exposure to potential positive consequences. And the problem with relying on probability of events doesn't consider the impact. And in a domain such as money, which remember is in Extremistan, you can lose all of your money in one venture. You could put all of your money in one investment and you could lose 100% of it. If you were to play a game of Russian roulette, and if anyone's not familiar with that, it's where you put one round in a revolver and you spin it around and you take turns to pull the trigger until someone dies. The odds are in your favor. You have a 5 in 6 chance of winning. However, the downside is so catastrophic that it's an irretrievable loss. You're going to blow your brains out. And so the probability is irrelevant if the impact is so catastrophic that you're unable to recover from it. That's an example of an Extremistan result. The how likely it is that it will happen is irrelevant if the small chance that it does happen means that you're fucked. Similarly, if you were going to board a flight and someone told you that we're about 65% confident that this pilot knows what they're doing, the probability is irrelevant to you, isn't it? Because in something like taking a flight, you want that to be the probability of the plane crashing, you want it to be 0 or as close to 0 as practically possible. So that's an example where the probability of an event is irrelevant or should be irrelevant in the context of risk management. The other factor is the presence or absence of evidence. This is a particular flaw, and it's particularly prone in the scientific tradition because when you're looking to prove something, you're looking for the presence of evidence. However, when you're looking to disprove something, you're looking for an absence of something. And this is a crucial difference because the absence of something is not the same as the presence of something. So if a doctor says to you, you're cancer-free, does that mean you're cancer-free? What do they actually mean by that? It means they've looked at your body and they've found no evidence of cancer. Does that mean you have no cancer? No, it does not. This is a case where the presence of evidence tells you everything, but the absence of evidence tells tells you nothing. Let's say I give you a glass of water and I say there's no evidence that this glass of water is poisonous. Does that mean that the water is safe to drink? No, it doesn't, because it could be a poison which hasn't been detected. Whereas if I've said I've detected a poison, I can say with certainty there's evidence that this water is poisonous. And so the absence of evidence is always much harder to prove. So like if you witness someone murder someone, you have evidence that they are a killer. Whereas the fact that you haven't seen them kill someone does not mean that they are not a killer. And these two are often conflated. And this can lead into, for example, the idea that, well, this hasn't happened before, therefore it can't happen. For example, people often underestimate the threat of nuclear war because it hasn't happened. But it only needs to happen once. And then all the other times it didn't happen is irrelevant. You only need to lose at Russian roulette once, and then it doesn't matter how many times you won before. I think we'll leave that there for today. I'm going to pick up the Black Swan in another episode and we'll go into more depth with it. But thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like and hit the subscribe button. Also, check out my blog at spokengreats.com and look forward to more great ideas from great books. See you soon.